everybody, and welcome to today's lesson, CSS buttons. What is a button? What is a CSS button? A button is an element that a user interacts with um, to kind of create an event or cause something to happen on a page, right? So if you want to say submit a form or whatever logic you want to put in the button, the button element is very important because we have it on every or most of our HTML pages and applications that we write. So we are going to take a look at how to design that properly. So, so we're going to be looking at the basic button styling. We'll look at button colors, sizes, how to have rounded corners, colored button borders, how to make buttons hoverable, and adding shadows to a button and having buttons being disabled, and creating button groups and vertical button groups, and how to put a button on an image. And finally, we would look at how to make animated buttons. So let's just dive right into the code section. So this is what we have right now. We basically have an HTML which does nothing. It's just an H2 which says Advanced CSS Buttons. So we're gonna have create our own buttons and we're gonna style them. So what do we do first? Let's create our first button. Okay, so we're gonna have our button elements, right? And this is our first button. So I'm just gonna call this defaults button. Good. Okay, so when I refresh this and you see the default button, which comes with its own default styling. We can also create the same button. So I'm just going to copy and paste, right? So if I just refresh this, it's going to be two buttons, right? But we want to style this differently, right? So what I want to do here is to style this using a class. So I want to create some separation. Let's create a class in our style section uh, to style this second button. So we use our class, and I'm gonna call this class uh, button, right? Okay, so now when I come to my style section, let us style our class button, right? So we're gonna style our class button, and what kind of style do we want to have, right? So I'm gonna have a background color because I want it to have a different color, and let's say brown, right? And then what else can I have? Let's add a border to this. This one, the default already has a border, but we can say no border, right? Okay. And then what color? Font color. Maybe white. We can change this later if it's not looking nice. And then we can add some padding to this. I usually want about 12 pixel, maybe 30 pixel. Okay. And then we can add some text align. And I want to center this text. And then I don't want any text decoration, so I'm gonna set this to none. And what else? Let's add a display type to be inline block. Okay, and then I'm gonna add what kind of font size am I looking at? Let's add 15 pixels, and then a margin of say 5 pixel, maybe 3 pixel. Okay. And then what kind of cursor or pointer do I want? Right. So now when I refresh this, it looks a little bit nicer, right? So if I go over it, the cursor is now a pointer. Good. So this is the second type, and I cannot just had a CSS class that I used to style the button. Good. The third or the second way that I'm going to do this is to use an input type. Right, so I'm going to create another button. This time I'm going to use the input element, right? And I'm going to use a type of button, right? And it's supposed to be index. Okay. And then I'm still going to use the same class to style it. So let's just say class button. So it uses the same styling, right? And then what value do I want this to have? I'm gonna put in input button. Okay. So then we have to create some space. Okay. So when I refresh this now, I have the same type of button, right? But this is gonna be the input element. So this is my third type, and I could create one more type. So let's just have some breaks just to give it some nice. Okay, so let's use the anchor a href, right? I know everybody's used to this by now. So now, just so it doesn't go anywhere, and I'm gonna put the same class as button. Oh no, as button, right? And then I'm gonna have my link, which is going to be a link to um, new page or something. Okay, so now if I refresh this, you see the same button. So we can have different types of buttons. So now let's look at how we can further add some styling to this. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to copy this button because I want to create a new button for our uh, styling. And I'm going to add another class to this. So I'm going to have the button class, but I wanted to have another class called just button, right? So that we can style that differently. So I could just put uh, new button because I want to have a different button that I can style. Okay, so I have this, and maybe I should break this down to the next line. Okay, good. So now it's in the next line. So now I want to create the styling for this button. And I need some more space. Okay, so good. So the first thing I want to do, I want to create rounded corners, right? So the property that we use, and I'm gonna have to style this btn class, right, is the border radius, right? So I'm gonna border radius, and the value is the value of the radius that you want. So the first one I'm gonna use is I'm gonna just put a 5 pixel, right? And then if I refresh this, you see that the radius of the edges have changed. So if I just say, let's go higher, 10 pixel, you can kind of see how the radius is changing, right? And if you wanted to do percentages, you can just say maybe 10, let's say 20%, right? Let's see, 20%, right? So you can see how it changes when we change the border radius. So I'm gonna keep it at 10 pixel. That looks better, right? So now, if we wanted to make something like an oval, let's say let's put like 50% and see 50%. It's gonna add more curvature, right? So you can kind of play around with the how curved you want the radius to be. So let's create another button, but this time let's add a border. Let's add some borders to this, right? So in the default button style, we set border none. So let's see how to create one with a border, right? So I'm gonna create a class called button2, and so we can style it. So I'm gonna say button2, and you guys guessed it. I'm just gonna have and I want to change the color. So I'm going to say background color, and this time I'm going to set it to white, right? And then I'm going to set the font color to say black, right? And then I have my border, and this time I'm going to add a border, say 2 pixel solid, not solo, solid. And the color I want to have is um 4C, 4C, 4C. Okay, so now when I refresh this, I have this border, right? You can have a lot, any color you want here. So if I say green, maybe that's green, and I refresh it, I have this button. So you can kind of play around with it, and if you want to add more types of properties, you could. So this is how we create our buttons with borders. And I had to create some space so we can see a lot more. So now let's create another button, and this time we want to hover a hoverable button, right? So let's say button 3 here, right? And so let me just refresh this so you see how it looks. And so now I can have my that button 3, and then I can style this using the transition duration. So I'm going to say transition duration, which is way down here, and I'm going to say 0.5 seconds, right? And then I'm going to say that button 3, but when I hover over it, I want the style to be, so the background color should change to, these colors look, let's say aqua blue, aqua, right? And then I want a font color should be black. Maybe that would stand out. I don't know. Okay, so now when I refresh this now and I hover over this, did I refresh it? Yep, I did. So, and it did not work. So what is the issue? Yes, I used button 3 here, but I'm not targeting the right class. Okay, so this should work. If I refresh this, now you see that it changed color when you hover over it. So now if we wanted to create a disabled button, to have that disabled effect, let's style this on button 4, right? What we can do is button 4, and now I can just change the opacity of this so that it looks, let's say, zero point 0.7, right? And what that does is I can refresh this, right? It looks a little disabled, right? And so now, but it still has the cursor, right? And I don't want it to have the cursor. So I'm just gonna say cursor, um, and sorry, not clip, cursor, and I'm gonna set this to not allowed, right? So now when I refresh this and I go, the cursor shows you not allowed. So that's how we create a disabled button. So now let's create a button group, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create, and maybe I might need this. So let's do this. I need to have a button group class, and maybe let's do that first, right? So down here, I want to create a div, and I'm going to have a class on this one called button group, btn, maybe group, right? And then in this div, I'm going to have my buttons, right? So I'm going to have a button, and I'm just going to call this button 1, 1, and maybe I should have a class on this also, which I'm going to call button. Okay. Oops, I just made a mistake again. Okay, so I'm going to call this button, and I'm just going to replicate this 3 times. Okay, so we have three buttons in this button group. And now we're going to style this, right? So if I just refresh this, we have these three buttons, right? So now, if I want to style this properly, I'm going to create my class button group, right? And I'm going to target the button. And pretty much, I might just have the whole thing here, right? And now what I want to do is I want this to float left so that there is no space. So I'm just going to add a float, and I'm going to say float left, right? And let me just refresh this, you see. And now the next thing that I want to have is to, and just so, let's see. Oh, 1T. Okay. So what we can do is to just remove this so it's consistent. Okay, good. So now I have 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. So that's what this float left does, right? It floats the buttons to the left of it, so there's no gap. Good. So now we have this set up. We want to add a hover effect, right? So I can do the same thing here. I can target the same class. I'm just gonna copy this to make my work easier, right? And this time I'm gonna target on hover, right? So now all I want to see is when I hover over it, I want my background color to change to what color would be suitable? Violet, if that's even a thing. Okay, so when I refresh this and I just hover over it, you see it changed, right? So that's how we create button group. So what if we wanted to stack these buttons instead of horizontally, we want to stack it vertically? Then we have to set these buttons to have a block status, right? So it occupies the entire width of the space provided. So the way we do it is we can disable this float left and instead put display and set it to block. And what that does is each of those elements would occupy the entire width, right? And it's going to force these ones to go beneath it. So when I refresh this, you see that it's now stacked vertically. Okay, good. So these are a few ways you can kind of like create fancy looking buttons, and you can add more color, more elements. You can add more animated stuff to your buttons on hover, on click, fade ins and stuff to it that you can look at on your own. Uh, if this is your first time, please subscribe, like, and share this video. And thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next lesson. Bye bye.